So I was asked to talk about venture capital funding in the Nordic region, and that's what I'll try to do. For those of you who don't know Industrifonden, just wanted to give a brief overview of who we are. It's an independent foundation, but with a one-off donation of funding from the government, founded in 1979. So we've been around for a while. It was a one-off donation of 1 billion Swedish at the time, which is, over 4 billion today. So something we did right. I'll get back to that a little bit. We have in the life science sector, which is of course the topic of today, we have 15 companies today. Average holding time is 6 years, and we're 6 people in the team. So that's the macro of who we are. We have a tech team, of course, I should mention that. That's the other side of the fund, technology. And in the life science team, then, we cover the whole life science spectrum, so pharma biotech, medical devices, and also digital health. And actually, we were one of the very early life science investors moving into the digital health arena. I think the first investment was 4 or 5 years ago, seeing, the opportunities and competitive advantages that can be in the Nordic region in the digital arena. I won't go into that because I'm sure most of you are familiar with the registries and personnummer and everything we have. Once we go in as an investor, we want to stay until there is a real inflection point, so we don't do one round of financing and then kind of not engage. And that also drives our investment decisions quite firmly. We're evergreen. We're flexible, we lead, we can co-lead, we can syndicate with others, we do every time, and we can participate. And so I'm going to get into a bit more around how we operate, and a large part of what we do is syndicating with international venture capital funds. And we like to think that we're an experienced team that brings more than capital to the entrepreneurs that we invest in. So, just want to set the scene a little bit around how we perceive our role, and it touches upon some of the points that were made by Alexander. So, as I mentioned, the capital we have is a one-off donation, and we are an independent foundation, so the government cannot interfere in how we invest. I think that's one of the if I'm a bit provocative, I think that arm's length distance to the government and political decisions is really one of the key success factors for Industrifonden, that we have that ethical compass of trying to do the right thing, but we're purely commercial in our investment decisions. But that also means that we own our own future. If we screw up badly, there will be no more Industrifonden. So that really pushes us to be very commercial in our investment decisions. And as Alexander touched upon, one of our major roles, as we see it, is to attract private capital. I mean, that's what we talk about at every conference, right? The lack of private capital in later stages of venture capital development. And so that's what we see as our major role, to show the world that you can make money in biotech, and you can make money in life science, and you can do it in the Nordics. And again, the best way to do that is, by making the right investments with a reasonable time to market. So that's also a driver for how we look upon investments and what we find attractive. We can't go into those really cool investments that will be commercially attractive in 15 years. Having said that, some of our best investments do take a long time. I'm proud to say, especially today when we saw the 3D printer, some of you might know that Industrifonden was a very early investor in Arcam, the 3D printing company. At that time, we also we worked also with loans. So the first time Industrifonden entered Arcam as a loan provider was in 1999. So I'm really impressed by that one. They picked that early. Anyways, diverging a bit. So we need to syndicate and make the investments that show the private investors and the players in the market that there's money to be made here, and that will benefit the whole industry. Algeta, Cormorant, and the recent success stories in the Nordic markets really do help. It spreads the word to the investors outside the Nordics that this is an exciting place. I think in general, our perception is that people do really recognize the science, the quality of science in the Nordics, but then there might be other challenges. We can get to that. So basically saying that, the solution for a player like Industrifonden is not to spread the capital too thinly with low likelihood for success, and that might be, perceived, because I know that I meet people and say, you do maybe one investment in the life science sector per year. is that really your role? But this is trying to set the scene and say, yeah, I think that actually is our role. And you can comment afterwards. I welcome provocative statements. So, setting the scene for how we view venture capital investing in the Nordic region, this is probably not news to anyone, but just want to say it, that, it's really challenging to do it in a purely Swedish environment. Looking back, I teach a course at Karolinska in entrepreneurship, and I have this really, I think it's a very illustrative slide, but pretty depressing, because you look at 10 years ago, the number of investors in life science on the venture capital side, and today it's pretty gloomy. So many of them came and failed for various reasons. We don't need to go into that, but the reality of the matter is that today it's HealthCap and us basically in the Swedish region, and we have a lot of investments together with them, but we're not the same fund, so we do need to have other playmates as well. Especially there's a lack of evergreen funds with staying power, and I think, as we all know, life science is a long game. Great rewards if you can stay in it, but you need to have that staying power. And yeah, we're the only one around in Sweden. Again, as I touched upon before, I think the typical response we get from international investors is saying, the science is great in the Nordics, and we heard about that before, the willingness to invest in science, and I think there is a great translation into good science. But the next step of translation into commercially attractive companies is not necessarily there. And if you come to think of it, what are the odds that a small company, even a small country, even though we're impressive by capita, what are the odds that we would have it all, right? So, and I think if you look at the recent winners in the biotech era and in the biotech success era, they're typically not Swedish, and they typically haven't had a lot of connections to the Nordics, if you look at the commercial side. So those are some of the challenges, some of the fundamental challenges we see in the Swedish environment. So what do we do about that? How do we operate? Well, basically, the conclusion becomes to say, okay, we really need to spend time building relationships and maintaining our relationships to international investors. And we've also decided to broaden our geographical scope. So we started as a Swedish investor, and today we have a Nordic footprint. Basically we cover all Nordic countries. Actually, we managed to take one company that was originally Danish. It's now listed in Sweden. So we like to tell our board of directors that it's all a question of when in time we look at the Swedish map. This was Sweden before. So what do we gain by expanding to a Nordic footprint? Well, we gain access to life science specific evergreen investors in Denmark, specifically Novo and Lundbeckfonden, which are evergreen. And in Norway, you have Investinor. We, of course, get increased expertise and networks for our portfolio companies, which is really valuable, smart capital. And we have the ability to build Nordic platform companies. So we see that as a great strength to us. And again, this is just a small flavor of who we work with on a regular basis, and the usual suspects of investors across the Nordic region and also Europe and the US. I think that's it's really an integral part of what we do, trying to convince people every day that there's great science here and there are great investments to be made, and we're happy to lead those investments as a local lead or syndicate together with them. So, we heard before from Alexander as well about the Swedish Venture Initiative and the new funding vehicles that are being put into place. I think we really welcome that. It's a great opportunity to get more playmates here in the Swedish market. And people with new expertise. Hopefully there will be some international investors that also, come here, part of that mandate, but not necessarily homegrown. I think that would be very welcome to get to increase, get some new, fresh thinking and better networks in there. Because we're one of the few actors that are not aspiring to get a part of that capital. I'm not the one with most detailed knowledge of them, but for what I hear, I think The comment I'd like to make in that whole debate is just to say that let's be realistic around what the typical investment size in a life science venture capital round is. I mean, over the course of an investment cycle, it's typically something like 80 to 100 million, of course, depending on what type of asset we're talking about. So, for what I've heard, it's still a debate on what the investment mandate will be and how large these funds will be. And I think to really shift the needle in this Nordic dynamic, Swedish dynamic with two venture players, they really need to have that staying power and being the muscle to stay when the rounds get bigger and when you actually have good results and need to fund larger trials or international expansion. Because otherwise, they'll make an important contribution, but it won't shift the needle for taking those companies all the way. So I think I'll actually stop there, Magnus. You're not even prepared because my presentation was so short, but I think I'll stop there and welcome questions from the audience. Thank you.
I forgot your school book. It's not ready. So, tack Nina. This is not the question that was prepared, but when I listen to you, so you say you can't invest in cool stuff that has a lot of years to market, which makes sense given the dynamics of the way it works. And in your personal opinion, how should we address that gap? I mean, whose responsibility is it? What should be done?
You mean the outcomes of tomorrow?
I mean, we have heard presentations here about diseases that are costing society tons of millions every year, and still these companies stay stuck in clay. You can't go in because it's too early, because you need to get the return, and you need to syndicate with people who have 10-year funds. So, in your opinion, who should we talk to as a community?
I wish I had a perfect answer for that. That was one-dimensional. I don't. I think one question that perhaps is on your list is for those companies to try to build corporate collaborations early. Probably not Swedish collaborations, but international collaborations. That could be one way, like you talked about.
Collaborate with bigger companies from the very beginning.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. I mean, in the very hot areas, that's perfectly doable. I think in the digital arena, we're seeing that, even on the health side, where the bigger corporations realize that we see it, but we don't know how to do it, so we'll go early with someone else. That's one way.
But wait now, may I interrupt? So,
sure.
If I didn't work for AstraZeneca, which I do, so somebody else is saying what I'm saying now. So when we go to Big Pharma, they always say it's too early, come back when you have clinical data. Yeah,
I'm not saying necessarily Big Pharma in this case, because I thought you were talking about technologies rather than drugs.
Well, it's an issue in both areas.
Sure. But so this point was more perhaps from a technology perspective with different types of players that have a different, I think the beauty and the challenge of the pharma sector is that licensing and partnering is so structured. It's really sophisticated, but it also makes it a bit square, right? And other players, I mean, when I was at Gambro when I was responsible for the ventures activities there, we had conversations on the technology side with other types of players like GE and those. They can be willing to go early. They're not fast, but they can be willing to go early for the right type of technology that fits for them. So I'm just saying it's not a magic bullet, but I think that's one way to do it. Then I think I really don't. This is kind of outside my comfort zone, so I shouldn't comment too much. But I think there's something about the early part of the ecosystem and that perhaps could be optimized between the different players and how the mandates they have and how to spread it. Because I think, and maybe Alexander will know this better, but my perception is that the amount of money in the early Swedish ecosystem is not bad. It's just how you structure it.
Yeah, I know we had tons of
It's a long conversation, so yeah.
So, any structured complaints from the audience or even great ideas, questions?
Have a shot.
It's not often you have this opportunity. I mean, this is one of basically few investors in Sweden that could provide money to you. So why, and you are silent, I'm stunned.
You're tired. Go ahead.
Eftersom ingen annan ville så. I was thinking of this that you said, you're talking about the valley of death. That's the problem for investors in Sweden. They don't want to take risks there. So could you make some kind of assignment that you say, if you're going in the valley of death, we will support you later on? Is it possible to start, as you say, bigger company, small company, big fund, smaller investors? Is it possible if I and other small companies invest in the valley of death? Are you prepared to or willing to sign assignment that you will support this business later on or something like that, to make some kind of cooperation?
You mean like an option deal or?
Sorry?
You mean like an option deal or?
Some kind of option like that. I don't know. It just turned up in my head.
Yeah, I mean, I think technically we're open to that concept. We don't do it so often because it lies in the nature of things that if that risk is there.
I think that would be possible to get smaller investment companies to take risks in the valley of death.
Yeah. So what you, yes, I understand. So we understand. So what you say is that you are willing to invest provided, and if we fulfill certain criteria, Industrifonden is happy to step in.
Something like that, yes.
I mean, there's an example, a similar example to that. One of the big venture capital funds, Index Ventures, actually they're called Medici now, but anyway, I know that they have as their financiers, I think it's Novartis, amongst others, and so they're very close to the pharma world, and they would do that. They would go with a case to Novartis, for example, and say, you know, this is the opportunity. If we do this, will you acquire that asset? And I think they're doing that really well. So I think the concept is interesting. We haven't seen it, and I think it's really case by case because it really depends on what type of risk that we would be willing to, you know, look into. So, but conceptually, I'm open.
I'll get back to you.
Please.
Any other questions? Yes? You are wrongly seated for a question. Oh.
So I have a question about the business models, especially when it comes to digital health. So I think finding the right business model is one of the main challenges there. So do you have any examples of success stories in Sweden, or how do you determine the valuation challenges with that when it comes to digital health?
So was the question of business model or valuation or?
Actually both. I think they go hand in hand. So.
Okay. I can comment on the digital side. I mean, it's like you say that the challenge is very much around finding a sustainable business model. And I think we have 2 investments today. We've done 3 in total, exited 1. We started off as a typical life science investor looking for areas in digital that are really life science specific, because that's an area we could grasp and where we can understand business models that are not based on the public healthcare system to begin with, because that's really slow, like we heard earlier today. So in the way we've approached it in both those companies is that the first business model is oriented towards the pharmaceutical industry, and then they're working to build those relationships in the public sector, but that's a longer game. The way we've solved that from an investment perspective is that we've made very small investments. Actually, we don't like to do small investments because it's even more work than the bigger ones, because typically the companies are more immature. But in the digital space, because we wanted to go into that area and to learn for ourselves, we did that and basically said, okay, we'll make a very small loan, or small, it's actually not small, but by our standards, so let's say up to 5 million. Together with you, will work actively, not as an owner, but to verify the business model over 18 months. Should you reach these milestones, and then there's a valuation connected to that at that point, then we enter as an owner. If we fail miserably, then we'll find another way, because the biggest liability to us is being an owner of that company that will not succeed in the future. So that's one way of working at it. And then, valuation, I think, comes with those milestones of saying, if you can achieve this, then it's easier for us to come to a view on valuation.
That's
I don't know if that
great answers. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? So Nina, I mean, the one who are fortunate and end up with your support, how do you work with these companies? And I mean, how can you assist them?
I think and that's really been an evolution for Industrifonden over the past 10 years, I would say. I wasn't there, but for what I hear, I think today we're just like a typical VC owner, for good and for bad. We're very active. That's the only way we can influence through our active ownership. It's the only way we can influence the probability of success. So we're very active. We really try to build our networks, both when it comes early to finding the right, what could it be, the right CRO or the right collaboration for a clinical trial or experts to bring in. Of course, supporting financing rounds. Of course, finding the right advisors or strengthening the board of directors. And then as you develop. As you approach a potential partnership, that's where we really lean in, and because those are owner questions, so when we're in a partnering process, we really lean in, bring in the right advisors with our own experience and of how you structure agreements or how you actually come to an exit situation. So it's. I think if you're looking just for capital, I had a conversation actually in one of the breaks with a guy who was going to set up this company, and he said, "Can I come to you for funding?" Of course, and how do you work? We're really active owners, and he said, "Oh no, then that's not for me." So it's if you don't like that, then don't come to us. I think we're very active.
Big thanks.
Thank you.